Urgent. A death sentence has been handed down in Moscow. Russia is in flames and darkness. The ground is exploding underfoot and Moscow is cut off from the world. An icy collapse, blackout, and strikes on top targets. The Ukrainian Armed Forces have simply broken loose. Russian lands instantly became uninhabitable. Trump crushed Putin publicly. The White House's fury live on air. Words were spoken in the US that threw the Kremlin into chaos. Putin lost his main trump card. The US president is heading into the lava. Putin's friend is preparing to flee. Intelligence has shaken the world. Planes prepared for evacuation. Elites fear. Regime crumbles. Pokrovsk, all turned upside down. The city of the 200ths, a complete disaster. Russia's elite divisions are drowning in their own blood. Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad, a concrete wall against which the Kremlin's last men were shattered. A historic record for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The Russian army has been wiped out by a swarm of drones. A month of executions for the occupiers. Ukrainian technology has made a leap that has shocked the world. All this and more in our episode of Hotspot. Russia in hell, an icy apocalypse and blackouts. Top targets flare up as the clock strikes midnight. And Moscow has been handed a death sentence. Shock. January tightened the noose around Putin's neck. The Magyar birds, a swarm of Ukrainian drones, carried out a total execution in Russia. While propaganda lies about stability, Russia has turned into a giant torch. Shocking details ahead. Russia is waking up more and more often without essential light, without comforting heat, or indeed, without any true sense of stability in their daily lives. Almost every day, there are new strikes on the energy infrastructure. Oil refineries, thermal power plants.
This is truly serious. Things are quite really burning indeed here.
And again, oil refineries. Entire districts are losing electricity and with it heating as well.
This is Belgorod. Basically, there's no electricity anywhere in Belgorod right now.
Accidents at thermal power plants, fires at oil refineries, and large-scale blackouts are no longer isolated incidents, but a systemic reality in Russia.
And everything that brings the war back in a mirror image onto the territory of the Russian Federation can undoubtedly be considered a success. Ukraine has done exactly what Russia did not expect.
In many regions of Russia, the shutdown of power plants means not only darkness, but also cold. People are left without heating and hot water, even in places where there haven't been any strikes on infrastructure.
If you've never had to fill an entire bathtub with snow just to go to the bathroom, waiting for it to melt so you'd have at least some water, then things have always been good for you. I went out to get water so I could wash the dishes.
But if such failures happen even without Ukraine's involvement, the question arises, what's going on with Russia's energy infrastructure?
If, when it comes to cities, Russians are at least trying to address the issue somehow, doing repairs as quickly as possible, at least as much as their energy infrastructure allows, then when it comes to villages, it's clear that villages aren't electorally important, not many people live there, and Putin, excuse my slang, just doesn't care.
What's surprising is that even in Russia, they understand that their situation is far from ideal.
If we carefully examine the official, publicly available information regarding the current state of wear and tear on our essential utility systems right now, it honestly becomes quite profoundly alarming. And if you further add to that the significant external impact, well, overall, it certainly doesn't inspire a great deal of optimism at all.
A particularly vulnerable point is the oil refineries. They support not only Russia's economy, but also its formidable military.
Problems arise both during repairs at the refineries, since this requires a lot of money and a significant amount of time, and also with repairing the logistics, which, as you might say, has a kind of house of cards effect. Because when you take down one element, all the others collapse at the same time.
Repairs drag on, reserves are insufficient, and the winter period only amplifies the consequences of accidents.
These systemic problems with the energy sector in the Russian Federation have become extremely difficult to solve, both because of financial constraints and the lack of all the necessary spare parts for repairs, since some of them are, once again, import dependent. In other words, Russia doesn't produce them itself, but imports them. And this is where Once again, sanctions mechanisms come into play.
Of course, the bunker dweller spares no money for war, but when it comes to keeping his citizens' homes warm, he's very stingy indeed.
Of course, the level of discontent is rising, and this discontent is no longer just in rural areas where blackouts happen. Now it's negativity that's concentrating in the big cities.
An energy crisis, even without Ukraine's involvement, is becoming a new reality for Russians. Expensive, risky, and increasingly unmanageable.
Just one day, let's say at minus 20 degrees Celsius, in conditions where there is no heat supply, will destroy your entire infrastructure. That's why we really hope, of course, that it won't come to that. And we need to make sure specifically that the heating plants, the combined heat and power stations, are not damaged if, for example, the strikes on thermal power plants continue.
When a blackout and lack of heat occur even without external interference, it speaks to the state of the system. For Russia, such failures are increasingly becoming the norm, and with the involvement of friendly drones, it's turning into a completely new reality.
Shock. Trump explodes with rage, destroys Putin in front of the whole world. Relations go to hell. The White House openly mocks Russia's impenetrable air defense. The State Department delivered a shocker. After these words, chaos erupted in the Kremlin offices. Putin lost his main trump card. The US president is going on the offensive. This is a geopolitical knockout that will forever change the balance of power. Watch.
Donald Trump is believing less and less in what Vladimir Putin tells him. Here is the reaction of the US president aboard the presidential plane, Air Force One. There, he stated that he does not believe Ukraine struck Putin's residence in Valdai.
I don't believe that the strike happened nearby. Something happened, but it has nothing to do with this.
When a journalist asked him to clarify why, after a phone conversation with Putin, he initially believed him. Trump said that it was the first information he had heard regarding the strike on the residence.
He said that his house was attacked. We don't believe that this happened now that we've been able to check.
Trump also intends to introduce new sanctions against Russia if the Kremlin does not make concessions in the negotiations. Senator Lindsey Graham, who was also on board the presidential plane during questions about the strikes on Putin's residence, emphasized that the issue of sanctions against Russia is discussed every day. But for now, this information is not for disclosure. The Republican senator also stated that, in his view, peace in Ukraine will be achieved under the threat of tariffs against Putin's clients. Graham is convinced that the example of India, which reduced its oil purchases from Russia after Trump imposed tariffs, shows that this approach works. The attitude of Trump and the United States toward Putin and Russia is rapidly deteriorating. This became especially noticeable after the special operation in Venezuela following Maduro's arrest. Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth openly mocked the work of Venezuela's air defense system, which had been purchased from Russia.
3 nights ago, nearly 200 of our best Americans entered the center of Caracas. It seems that Russian air defense didn't work so well after all, did it? They successfully captured a man notably wanted by American justice, and in the process, remarkably, without losing a single valuable American citizen.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio also voiced the Trump administration's attitude toward Russia and the US position on Venezuela's future. He made it clear that the United States will not allow Venezuela to become an operational hub for Iran, Russia, or China. Furthermore, according to Rubio, the US does not need Venezuelan oil since the country has enough of its own resources. The main goal is to prevent Russia and other rivals from increasing their influence in Venezuela's oil industry.
This is the Western Hemisphere. We live right here. And we absolutely will not allow this place to become an active operational base for our adversaries, our competitors, and our rivals.
Washington will primarily restrict investments from Russia, China, and Iran in Venezuela's oil industry. The interest of these countries in Venezuela's black gold is no coincidence. After Maduro's arrest, the US wants to resume the operations of its companies in Venezuela and increase the country's budget revenues. Since 2006, the regimes of Putin and Maduro had been strategic partners. The Kremlin provided Caracas with almost $20 billion in loans in exchange for loyalty and support. Now, after the arrest of the Venezuelan dictator, Russia has lost yet another ally. And with these actions, the US is putting pressure on Putin and signaling that he will have to make compromises in peace negotiations with Ukraine.
If the Americans come in, set up production, the taxes that American companies paid to the Venezuelan budget as royalties for developing the country's natural resources were significant. And, as we know, in the 1960s and 1970s, Before nationalization and then after, so to speak, the rise of the Chavez and Maduro regimes, Venezuela was practically the richest country in Latin America.
It seems that Trump and his administration have radically changed their attitude toward Putin and his policies and have fully taken Ukraine's side. At the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, which took place on January 6th, the United States was represented by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. From Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky and the new head of the office, Kirilo Gudanov, arrived in Paris. The main topic is security guarantees and the deployment of a US military contingent on Ukrainian territory.
Panic in Tehran. Putin's ally is packing his bags. Iran's supreme leader is preparing to flee the country. Intelligence has rocked the global media. Dictators are falling one after another. While planes are being fueled for escape in Iran, icy fear is growing in the Kremlin. The Kremlin is next in line for an uprising. Watch for all the details.
Putin's ally is preparing to flee. Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei has developed a secret plan to escape to Moscow. This was reported by The Times.
Khamenei plans to flee Tehran with his closest circle, consisting of 20 aides and family members, including his son and presumed successor, according to the staff.
Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei has a backup plan to escape the country if his security forces fail to suppress the erupting protests.
Putin is ready to receive dictators who have had fairly close interactions with Russia.
The plan includes gathering assets, real estate abroad, and cash to ensure a safe relocation. It is known that Khamenei owns an extensive network of assets. According to a 2013 Reuters investigation, the total value of assets, including real estate and companies, amounts to $95 billion.
Sources note that the escape plan will be activated if Khamenei believes that his security forces are not following orders. And although Khamenei protects his loyalists, controls key appointments and their security, it is also noted that he is weakened both mentally and physically after last year's war with Israel.
On top of that, Khamenei has hardly been seen in public, and notably, nothing has been heard from him during the last several days of protests.
In the intelligence assessment, he is described as paranoid. On one hand, he is highly ideologically motivated, but on the other, he is pragmatic in his views. He sees tactical compromise as a means to achieve long-term goals. He thinks long-term.
It's no surprise why the leader of Iran is planning to flee specifically to Moscow.
As for Iran, we are also seeing quite serious military cooperation between Putin's Russia and Iran. So it's no coincidence that Khamenei is counting on Putin if he has to flee. Well, why might he need to escape? Because we are seeing quite serious protests happening in Iran right now. And it is entirely possible that the authorities may not be able to handle them.
The country is currently experiencing the largest protests in the past 3 years. During clashes between protesters and law enforcement, people have already been killed. It is noted that the protests are caused in particular by local residents' dissatisfaction with the rapid rise in inflation and the record drop in the currency's value. Moreover, US President Donald Trump has stated that the United States is ready to help the protesters in Iran if Tehran suppresses the protests by force. And such statements from the American leader frighten the dictator even more, especially against the backdrop of events in Venezuela.
Undoubtedly, as they often say, after that truly brilliant and highly successful operation involving the dramatic abduction of Maduro, many authoritarian dictators around the world are now starting to seriously wonder if precisely the same unfortunate fate could potentially happen to them as well. That is why, of course, Khamenei is thinking about this as well. So yes, of course, everyone is constantly thinking about how to carefully preserve their own precious, worthless life. It's clear that Maduro wasn't killed. He's being put on trial, yes, but everyone wants some other kind of guarantees. As for Moscow, Moscow is home to so many fugitive dictators in various places, starting with the semi-dictator Yanukovych and his associates, and ending, as we've already discussed, with Assad.
The leader of Iran also has the example of another dictator. The Iranians' plan is based on the escape of Syrian leader Bashar Assad, who fled from Damascus to Moscow by plane before opposition forces captured the capital in December 2024.
The story in Syria is also well known, and in many ways, Assad managed to hold on for so long, in part because of Moscow's support. The number of dictatorships is gradually starting to decrease. So one would like to think that Putin will be next. But there, as they say, it all depends on how history unfolds and to what extent Trump will be ready to deal not only with Maduro, but also with Putin.
For Moscow, receiving dictators is also important because it's a way to show other dictators that the Kremlin can still maintain its influence. But is that really the case?
They need to somehow justify the fact that they couldn't help them. Yes, in fact, even in Syria, events took place in Syria, and Moscow couldn't do anything to help Assad. So at the very least, they could offer him refuge. It's the same story with Venezuela. Despite the agreement that was signed, despite the weapons, including Russian air defense systems that were stationed there, despite the Cuban special forces and so on, still, well, Maduro won. So in this situation, when Putin is losing almost all of these very painful and sensitive cases for him, at least he can show other dictators that we will always give you shelter.
So it turns out that all roads for dictators lead to Russia. But judging by the panic in Iran and how dictatorial regimes are collapsing in other countries, things are not going well for Moscow either, which is increasingly losing its influence.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Putin is in a panic. A mountain of casualties near Pokrovsk. The Russian army has drowned in its own blood. Shock. The Kremlin dictator's nightmare has become reality. Russia's elite divisions are dying by the tens of thousands, but still haven't managed to break through the steel defenses of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad have become a concrete wall against which the aggressor's last hopes for a quick victory have been shattered.
Putin is furious. He couldn't boast about capturing Pokrovsk for the new year. This sector of the front remains one of the hottest. Today, the key task for the defense forces is to hold back the enemy's advance and destroy its resources.
Fighting is ongoing in Pokrovsk, north of the railway, and it's exactly the same situation right now in Myrnohrad. Battles are taking place at various points in Myrnohrad.
The enemy is trying to make maximum use of the weather conditions.
Under the thick cover of heavy snowfalls, the enemy can effectively infiltrate, skillfully hide from the watchful view of our surveillance drones, and thus strategically try to build up their forces and capabilities. This infiltration tactic is typical for them. It is quite dangerous in urban areas because you can hide in the basement, you can take cover, in other words, you can gather forces under the cover of the weather. And in this way they can create threats with
the onset of frost, the occupiers have started to use various equipment more frequently, and they are trying to bring their infantry as close as possible to our positions so they can begin the assault. Despite the enemy's attempts to advance, Ukrainian defenders made progress in the Pokrovsk direction, in Rodinsky and Rishin. Near Pokrovsk, Ukrainian soldiers destroyed a column of enemy forces on ATVs. Another S-300 SM radar was also destroyed in the Donetsk region. The Russians, however, managed to advance along the H-20 highway in the area between Kostiantynivka and Drushkivka. Despite fierce fighting, the Russian side is spreading statements about the alleged complete occupation of Myrnohrad, backing them up with propaganda videos from the southern outskirts of the city. The General Staff has denied information about the complete capture of Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad, and several other cities. Most of Pokrovsk still remains in the gray zone. The fierce struggle for every block continues. In
any street fighting today, there is no clear front line. There are positions that are scattered, not mixed together. There are our positions and there are enemy positions.
It's difficult to spot the occupiers in the city because they change into civilian clothes. Russian.
Troops in Pokrovsk are using civilian clothing for deception, which is tantamount to acts of perfidy, a war crime under the Geneva Convention. At the
Institute for the Study of War, they believe that capturing Pokrovsk will bring Russia only a limited tactical benefit, while the cost of such an offensive remains extremely high. Over the past 20 months, the offensive in the Donetsk region has cost the Kremlin extraordinarily dearly. From October 2023 to the summer of 2024, Russian troops managed to advance 40 kilometers from Avdiivka to the outskirts of Pokrovsk, paying for this with losses equivalent to at least 5 divisions of armored vehicles, more than 1,000 armored vehicles, and over 500 tanks. They
do not care about losses. In other words, for them, significant losses are a necessary and unavoidable part of advancing their strategic objectives. They are always ready to keep taking them. Drones, these advanced aerial vehicles currently control the air, and they are remarkably able to detect and effectively destroy concentrations of enemy equipment even before it reaches the critical line of contact.
According to analysts, in October alone, the Russians captured about 30 square kilometers near Pokrovsk, losing up to 25,000 soldiers. Faced with such massive losses, the occupying forces revised their tactics. Instead of large mechanized assaults, they switched to infiltration by small infantry groups. This approach helps reduce equipment losses, especially under attacks from Ukrainian drones, but it comes at the cost of extremely high soldier mortality.
They adopted infiltration tactics after we started deploying killer drones using UAVs. When they realized that armored assaults were not working, that it was impossible to concentrate armored vehicles for breakthroughs on the front lines, they began to use infiltration methods. In the summer, they took cover in tree lines, advanced under the cover of these groves, and due to the sparsity of our defensive lines, they tried to mass in Tula. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the weather is different. The weather can be used to help. Snow, rain, fog, and so on.
Russia is exhausted by the prolonged positional warfare and has limited reserves. And it is unable to rapidly advance its offensive, especially considering the density of Ukrainian fortifications to the west of the city. At the same time, the occupiers are demonstrating a new tactic.
First, they systematically disrupt Ukrainian logistics using drones and then deploy infantry and sabotage groups to put pressure on the defenders. There is particular concern about the Russians' ability to strike at medium range and weaken the positions of the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
Fighting near the Pokrovsk Myrnohrad agglomeration in Donetsk region has been ongoing for almost a year and a half. Gerasimov has already reported the occupation of Pokrovsk to Putin 3 times. Such credit-taking of cities no longer surprises even Zivy and Korov.
The Kremlin exaggerates the significance of capturing Pokrovsk in order to present Russia's advance on the battlefield as inevitable. This sense of inevitability is shared by some members of President Donald Trump's negotiating team who are trying to develop a peace proposal for the war in Ukraine.
Pokrovsk and Leningrad, they've already latched onto them. They're already fighting in 7 national mounds. For them, of course, it's important to see it through to the end.
Well, from a political, informational, and image perspective, it's important for them. And from a political standpoint as well, meaning that once the fighting for Pokrovsk and Myrnohradskaya is over, they'll have forces available for further offensives. Well, first and foremost, that's Konstantinovka, Dobropolya, and the Slaviano-Kramatorsk agglomeration.
As long as Russia feels it is making progress on the battlefield, the Kremlin will not be interested in real negotiations, and diplomatic initiatives without halting the offensive will remain largely ineffective.
An absolute record in the AFU. The Ukrainian drone swarm is wiping out the Russian army. This has been a true month of execution for the occupiers. An unprecedented number of enemy targets have been hit. An incredible leap in Ukrainian technology that has shocked the entire world. See the details.
In 7 months, with targets worth $20 billion, the defense forces set an absolute record for destroying Russian equipment and assets at the front, carrying out just under 1 million sorties on combat missions.
Oh, come on. That's just absolutely really so excellent.
The report on the work done was posted on Facebook by the UAV systems forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. And the numbers in it are truly impressive. Since the creation of the UAV systems forces in just under half a year, more than 50,000 occupiers have already been eliminated. And this figure continues to grow every month thanks to the expanding operational range of UAVs.
Unmanned systems are increasingly creating more and more new lines of active combat contact and engagement. They are making these areas dangerous, and the distance from the line of contact, both into the enemy's operational space and ours, is becoming ever deeper. As of today, the maximum such complex zone is 15. You could say that by the end of 2025, we have reached a point where 25 kilometers have become extremely dangerous for anything located there. By mid-2026, this significant distance will very likely reach around 34 to 35 kilometers, possibly even 40 kilometers, a considerable expansion indeed.
Despite the fact that Russia is also making progress in the field of unmanned systems, experts say that the undisputed leadership in drone innovation belongs to the Ukrainian Armed Forces. This is primarily due to decisions that commanders often make independently on the ground.
The Ground Unmanned Systems Company of the 93rd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has developed and is using an original version of an assault ground drone armed with a block of unguided NAR-S5 aviation rockets. The commander, who goes by the call sign Electrician and who proposed this concept, explained that the idea arose from a desire to increase the firepower of mobile ground platforms. The inspiration came from a UB-1657 rocket pod found on an old Soviet combat aircraft that had served as a monument for decades. The device was carefully dismantled and restored for reuse. And
that's where the results come from. According to the same report from the drone operators, since May 2025, more than 7,500 Russian vehicles used to break through to positions have been destroyed, as well as over 5,500 motorcycles and another 2,500 cannons and howitzers. And of course, what would it be without heavy equipment? During the same period, the Russians have also lost 532 tanks and hundreds of lightly armored vehicles. The drone
successfully reached the ambush site and waited for the Russian MTLB armored personnel carrier with infantry. The ground drone opened fire on the front of the armored vehicle and damaged its control system, after which the MTLB began to move uncontrollably. Then the TV-12.7 droid turned around and fired into the troop compartment of the armored personnel carrier, targeting the Russian infantry. After the battle, reconnaissance UAVs surveyed the area and discovered the MTLB and the bodies of the eliminated occupiers in the forest belt.
At the same time, the Ukrainian Armed Forces use drones not only for attacks. In recent months, they have become a crucial element of Ukrainian logistics in the combat zone and have already saved hundreds of our soldiers' lives.
Advanced robotic ground systems are effectively used to evacuate wounded Ukrainian soldiers. We should also mention that crucial logistics are meticulously ensured by delivering essential supplies by air, both with agile small reconnaissance drones and with powerful heavy bombers, the key models of which are currently in active service with the armed forces. At the same time,
our command clearly understands the need to develop unmanned systems at the front. That's why new and innovative solutions are constantly being introduced for the forward positions of the defense forces. In
Ukraine, there are plans to create robotic strongpoints equipped with combat modules to counter Russian occupiers. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. And
while government programs are working on the large-scale technologization of the front, our soldiers themselves are also improving their UAVs. The latest trend at the end of 2025 has been new batteries for drones, which right now allow for more efficient operation with the equipment already available. And now,
these innovative new types of advanced batteries signify that the battery unit itself is significantly lighter, and it retains a much greater electrical charge. As a direct result, the drone powerfully propelled by this enhanced battery can effortlessly fly considerably farther and for extended periods. The farther a drone can effectively fly and reliably deliver useful payloads, in our specific case essential ammunition, the more effectively and efficiently we can precisely target the enemy in strategic areas where they are actively gathering and consolidating their forces before moving to the critical line of contact.
Work on upgrading UAVs is also underway across the border. The latest invention is the upgraded Shaheds, which are now equipped with anti-aircraft missile systems. Recently, our air defense shot down one of these. These missiles are intended to counter Ukrainian aircraft that shoot down enemy drones. However, according to analysts, although this innovation has caused a stir, it does not pose any significant danger.
You need to get a good lock on the target in order to launch a manpads. In addition, you have to keep it locked for some time because a manpads doesn't work instantaneously. Before launching, you need to cool the guidance system, the seeker head. And that takes time. So, let's just say there is practically no danger for aircraft. The operator won't be able to track the plane and hit it with such a device. By manpads, I mean the general manpad system on the Shahed. Yes, for helicopters the danger is a bit greater because helicopters have less maneuverability and speed.
But for Shaheds, the danger is enormous. In addition to aviation and anti-aircraft guns, which have been successfully shooting down Russian UAVs for several years now, interceptor drones have now joined them, taking on a huge part of the work.
Interceptor drones have carved out a rather important niche for themselves. They're not a magic bullet, they won't repel every attack on the country, but they do destroy their share of Shaheds. By the way,
another record for the strength of the defense was set in December, destroying over 106,000 enemy targets, surpassing their own November figures by more than 30% and setting a historic high for the destruction of Russian air defense and radar systems. In numbers, that came out to 4 units per day. Bashkortostan, a republic region,
is on fire. A giant factory blew up, and in Kupansk, the Russian headquarters was executed. There is no communication. The Air Force delivered a devastating strike of retribution. Russian generals did not expect such a failure. All the details are coming up.
The new year began in flames for Russians. Here is a drone attack on the bearing plant in Penza.
Violent, powerful, destructive explosions.
At the petrochemical plant in Sterlitamak, Bashkortostan, and at the oil depot in Usman-Lipetsk region. And this is only the beginning of the defeat of legitimate military targets by Ukrainian defense forces. The good drones are not skipping over the temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories either. Russian Telegram channels showed the aftermath of the strike on a Russian forces strongpoint set up in the basement of a hospital in Kupiansk, Kharkiv region. The occupiers admit the effectiveness of the Ukrainian pilots' strike, as a result of which the Russian command post was completely destroyed and there is no contact with those who were there. This video exposes a rat in Kupiansk who was directing enemy fire at the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Ukrainians identified the enemy's location and captured him. And here is another successful operation to contain about 50 Russians in the Kupiansk direction. The enemy tried to use the Soyuz gas pipeline for a covert withdrawal and further buildup of forces. As a result of the operation, the Russians did not achieve their objectives. The situation in the area of responsibility has been stabilized according to the defense forces.
Kupiansk is almost entirely under the control of Ukraine's defense forces. There is what can be called obvious resistance from the Russian occupiers. These are blocked small assault groups that have no access to ground logistics. Logistics are carried out using heavy quadcopters. The Russian Federation
has reinforced the motorized rifle brigades in the Hulyaipol direction with Bars assault regiments. Hulyaipol itself has been destroyed by 30 to 40%. This is according to the soldiers who are holding the defense there.
The Hulyaipol direction allows the occupiers to transfer operational reserves, taking into account the terrain. The terrain there is quite complex when it comes to detecting the personnel of small assault groups.
The intensification of hostilities in the Hulyaipol direction has less military and more political significance for the Kremlin.
Against the backdrop of the failure of the Russian dictator's claims about capturing Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, and Myrnohrad, it is extremely important for him to demonstrate to both the Russian audience and, above all, to the American president, the capabilities of Russian troops in occupying key settlements in Ukraine.
Hulyaipol is the second largest city in Zaporizhia region, which in theory could allow the occupiers to gain fire control over Zaporizhia. But, as practice shows, all the occupiers' grand plans are shattered by the Ukrainian defense. Therefore, in essence, the occupiers are opening yet another front for themselves, one they will once again be ashamed of.